CBS World News, Bob Trout speaking. It has now been nearly 2 hours since the first German radio announcement that the invasion had begun. Frankly, we don't know at this time whether those German news agency reports that the invasion has begun are true or not. However, the scarcity of any details from the Germans in these 2 hours after the first announcement do throw very strong doubt on the possible truth of the German story. Up until this moment, of course, there's been no confirmation from any Allied source that an invasion may have started. Elmer Davis, director of the Office of War Information, says that he too knows nothing of the reports.
It's 8 a.m. on D-Day, and whatever Bob Trout thinks and Elmer Davies says, as we know, this invasion has very much begun.
About the same time that Trout is speaking on the radio from New York, Eisenhower messages Chief of the General Staff of the U.S. Army George Marshall with an update.
Local time is now 8 in the morning. I have as yet no information concerning the actual landings, nor of our progress through beach obstacles. Communique will not be issued until we have word that leading ground groups are actually ashore. All preliminary reports are satisfactory. Airborne formations apparently landed in good order, with losses out of approximately 1,250 airplanes participating about 30. Preliminary bombings by air went off as scheduled. Navy reports sweeping some mines, but so far as is known, channels are clear and operation proceeding as planned. In early morning hours, reaction from shore batteries was sufficiently light that some of the naval spotting planes have returned awaiting call. The weather yesterday, which was original date selected, was impossible all along the target coast. Today, conditions are vastly improved both by sea and air, and we have the prospect of at least reasonably favorable weather for the next several days. Yesterday, I visited British troops about to embark, and last night saw a great portion of a United States Airborne Division just prior to its takeoff. The enthusiasm, toughness, and obvious fitness of every single man were high, and the light of battle was in their eyes. I will keep you informed.
And there you have it. This is why CBS have not received any confirmation. But Eisenhower is soon going to find out where his troops stand and how they are doing. What is clear is that there is too much happening at once for anyone to be able to report yet.
Again, we will let our reports run without comment. We begin with Omaha. There was still Schneider's Ranger unit at sea that had not yet been committed, never having got that message from rudder to hit the Pointe du Hoc. What they receive instead are distorted radio calls from the Beachmaster of sectors Dog White and Dog Green. This happened last hour, but there was just too much action to cover everything then. Right. Schneider orders the coxswains to bring their craft to the westernmost part of Omaha Beach, right onto Dog Green. Here, they turn 90 degrees and prepare to land in 3 waves. Thing is, the radio distortion is so bad that Schneider does not get the message that Dog Green is being closed off, and they begin landing right in front of the active German resistance nests at the Vierville Draw. The LCAs of the Rangers' first wave are nearly shredded as they slam into the now submerged beach obstacles, and once the ramps go down, the Germans atop the bluffs open fire. 3 Rangers were hit as soon as they got into the water. A few took momentary shelter behind the beach obstacles, then pushed onto the sand. The next craft in line was blown up about 300 yards from shore by an explosion that seemed to be underneath the craft and was therefore attributed to a mine, perhaps, or an outer obstacle. The coxswain was killed, and the platoon leader and another Ranger wounded. Sergeant Major Manning Rubenstein yelled, "Abandon ship!" and the men went over the side. Rubenstein, swimming, noticed for the first time that they were under fire. He and Sergeant Fida saw 5 men killed in the water. Many wounded reached the sand, then went back into the water to avoid grazing fire and to float in with the tide. Schneider's outfit has seen combat from North Africa to Anzio, but nothing tops this for intensity and brutality. The Rangers of Companies A and B, like the regular infantry before them, suffer heavy casualties in mere moments. Only 35 men of A Company and 27 from B Company even reached the seawall out of 130 who launched with the transports before dawn. Schneider watches in anguish as the first waves are cut down, supposedly yelling, "I'm not going to waste my battalion on that beach." He orders the 14 remaining LCAs to abandon the landing plan. With frantic hand signals, the coxswains redirect their vessels to the left, about 1.5 kilometers to the east. Here, the rest of the 5th Rangers land on a small alcove that is interrupted by a series of breakwaters jutting from a low wooden seawall. For the time being, this area, part of Dog White, will keep the Rangers out of reach of enemy small arms fire. But they cannot stay here forever. As the clock struck 7:30, well, where there are clocks, a single ship carrying a very special group of Americans approached Omaha Beach. It is none other than Brigadier General Norman Dutch Coda, along with Colonel Charles Canham. Canham commands the 116th Regiment, and Coda is the Assistant Divisional Commander of the 29th Infantry Division. They themselves could clearly witness the unfolding catastrophe. In front of the Dog sector, they see 18 tanks stranded just above the waterline, firing against some targets amongst the bluffs. In front of them, beyond the obstacles, are large groups of men pushing themselves against the low seawall. What they do not see is evidence that the aerial bombardment of the beach has even taken place, nor that the demolition teams have gotten a chance to get rid of the obstacles in the water. This group itself actually nearly meets with disaster as their craft is thrown against a pole with a teller mine on top of it, which luckily does not explode. Coda and his officers touch down and follow the infantry, running across the beach to reach the meager cover of the shingle and the breakwaters at the timber seawall. Soon the general lies prone alongside the GIs as the mortar shells explode all around them. It might seem foolish to send a general into this mess, but it also might be the only chance to salvage this situation. Coda begins shouting orders and encouragement to the men until he finds the unit he is looking for. Coda asks, "Are you Colonel Schneider of the Rangers?" "Yes, sir," Schneider replies. Coda then tells him, "Colonel, you're going to have to lead the way. We're bogged down. We've got to get these men off this goddamn beach." After Coda finishes speaking, he turns toward the men nearby and says, "Rangers, lead the way." 90 minutes into the invasion now, though, and the situation at Omaha is still desperate. The arrival of the second wave does little to relieve the pressure on the GIs trapped at the shingle and seawalls. The original invasion plan now calls for large LCIs to bring in heavy reinforcements. Unlike the popular Higgins boat, the landing craft infantry is often dubbed lousy civilian idea. Although the LCIs can carry 200 men at a time, they're also 4 times longer than LCVPs and 30 times heavier. These giant, unwieldy, and unarmored bathtubs have been slowly drifting into anything but cleared water and right into the sights of the enemy guns. One shell, one mine, is enough to do terrible damage to these landing craft, filled to the brim with soldiers and ammunition. One LCI attempted a landing back at 7:40, but got stuck by wreckage blocking its way. Caught by the tide, it swung round to port and up against a pole which triggered a teller mine, injuring several soldiers on board. Another LCI then tried to circumvent the wreckage, but as soon as it began unloading its troops, an 88mm shell hit its square center, detonating the fuel tanks below. A terrifying blast lifted the whole ship upwards with a sudden lurch from the bow. A sheet of flame and steel shot out from the forward hold. The ship quivered as if it were pulling apart, and the concussion threw the 3 of us in the con backwards and down hard. The heat was like the midst of a blast furnace. 41 soldiers in the forward troop compartment were trapped in a fiery furnace, most of them being killed instantly. Flames and dense smoke were pouring from the hatch, and the ramps were damaged, making both impossible to lower. Everywhere were faces blackened from the smoke and fire. I saw army officers pleading with their men to get off as quickly as possible. Some soldiers were jumping overboard, and others hid or let themselves down a chain up forward of the damaged ramp. The cries of some of the helpless soldiers in the deep water were pitiful. The problem of the uncleared obstacles and the wreckage in the path of the arriving reserves is becoming increasingly painful. High Command planned for 16 50-meter breaches across Omaha Beach, but the sappers and demolition teams have managed only 6. Well, 6.5. This is still a remarkable feat given the terrible condition on the beaches. Most of these breaches are on the eastern side of Omaha for the 16th. while the 1/16th to the west can only count on 2 such cleared lanes. And naturally, both are far from the Vierville draw. The beach exits as well are still closed, as no combat engineer has had a chance to come even close to blowing his way through. It is becoming more and more obvious that the direct approach through the draws is simply impossible. By now, they have landed 6,000 troops on Omaha, and some sectors of the beach are getting crowded, either with corpses or with troops hiding at the beach walls and shingle embankment. Other parts of the beach, however, are nearly vacant, like the sector between the Les Moulins and Saint-Laurent draws, the theoretical boundary between the 2 regiments. This is the exact place where the 4th Battalion of the 1/16th is to land. But here as well, the tragedy of the Omaha landings repeats itself. The craft of Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Meeks hits a mine from a submerged obstacle, and the boat begins to quickly sink. Leaving their heavy equipment behind, the men wade ashore, only to find themselves right in the sights of a German pillbox. As the tracer rounds fly over the beach, the GIs run through the obstacles towards the shingle. Meanwhile, opposite Les Moulins, General Coda is about to get the men of the 1/16th B and C companies into action. Just beyond the seawall is a paved road that runs parallel to the beach. So far, the Germans have successfully defended this approach, and it's blocked off with 2 belts of barbed wire. Coda orders the breakthrough despite the obvious danger. The GIs make their way to a point where the seawall meets a low mound of earth, and under cover of automatic rifles, push several Bangalore torpedoes into the wire. The explosions create several gaps. Rushing into a gap, the first men are cut down by the German machine guns, but others that follow have more luck. Making a mad dash, the men of C Company cross the promenade and enter the grassy flatland between the bluffs and the beach. Here, they stumble into a network of German communications trenches, which they immediately use to their own advantage. Using this cover, they reach the bluffs and begin making an exit. Gorenson's Rangers are at the top of those cliffs they climbed last hour. They have now gotten into the German trench system. Working in teams of 2s and 3s, the Rangers can finally show off their elite combat training, and this they do, quickly clearing out the German position. Schneider's Rangers are following up on Coda's orders to go up the bluffs. His guys blow gaps into the barbed wire with Bangalore's and begin pushing inland. Going up in a diagonal to their right, they go straight into the thickest smoke from the burning grass. The Rangers' advance, although now hidden from enemy eyes, slows to a crawl, and the men must put on their gas masks in order to breathe. The fighting at the eastern side of Omaha Beach is in many ways identical to what's going on in the west. Here, the 16th Infantry is also reinforced by its commander, Colonel George Taylor, and his staff. Only that happens like 40 minutes or so after General Coda arrives. As if to mirror Coda's experience, though, Taylor also has a near-deadly encounter with a German mine. And wading ashore, he sees the same helplessness in his men before him. Seeing the GIs huddled together at the shingle, making barely any return fire, makes him think, we're lined up on this beach like cans in a storeroom. Basically, like Coda before him further west, Taylor has thousands of men that have barely any support weapons and are under constant fire from snipers and machine guns. Exposing himself to danger, he moves up and down the beach, trying to organize his men and get a grip on the situation. With the exits blocked, it's clear they can't get anywhere without clearing the heights. The strategy of taking the draws has failed. They need to get up the bluffs. In his great stentorian voice, he shouts, "Get the hell off the beach! If you stay on, you're dead or about to die." There is one group of men already attempting just that, though. That little group of Company E, under Lieutenant Spaulding, has by now crossed the tidal flat between the Saint-Laurent and Colleville draws. Using Bangalore torpedoes to blast a gap in the wire, one by one, the 32 GIs climb over the rocky embankment behind the shingle. Concealed by the tall grass, they make a dash across the narrow dirt road paralleling the beach and into a sheltered passage near a ruined stone cottage. Any further movement down this side of the road is deterred by an Achtung Minen sign, so they have no choice but to climb the bluffs themselves. This is no easy job without adequate climbing gear, yet they make it. From there, about 400 meters to their left, Spaulding spots a large enemy position. Caught between the bunker and the minefield, he chooses to attack before the Germans can open fire. They were a little box-type mine, and it seems that the place was infested with them, but I didn't see them. We lost no men coming through them, although H Company coming along the same trail a few hours later lost several men. The Lord was with us, and we had an angel on each shoulder on that trip. Trying to get the machine gun above us, Sergeant Blades fired his bazooka and missed. He was shot in the left arm almost immediately. Private First Class Curley was shot down next. Sergeant Phelps, who had backed up PFC Tilley's BAR on the beach, moved into position to fire and was hit in both legs. We decided to rush the machine gun about 15 yards away. As we rushed it, the lone German operating the gun threw up his hands and yelled, "Kamerad!" We would have killed him, but we needed prisoners for interrogation, so I ordered the men not to shoot him. He was Polish. Since there is a Polish-born soldier in Spaulding's group who speaks Polish, they interrogate the Polish conscript, and he tells them about another bunker overlooking Saint Laurent about 700 meters further to the right. If they can take that one out as well, then the defensive fire on Omaha will be greatly reduced. It is also at this point that reinforcements arrive. These are men from G Company who landed with a second wave about 8 a.m. G Company lost 40 men on the beach, but is still 150 men strong. Under Captain Joseph Dawson, they blasted their own line through the wire, took out another machine gun nest, and then spotted Spaulding's group on the bluffs. At 8:30, Spaulding's and Dawson's are the first units to move inland from Omaha Beach. At the east end of Omaha, Company L and other soldiers of the 3rd Battalion have found themselves somewhat isolated on what is barely a shoreline opposite the narrow Cabourg draw. There's not even a shingle here, just a line of low cliffs. Farther up the bluffs, they can make out a German strongpoint firing onto the beaches. Company L has looked for a way to get off the shore, but there's only a modest earthen embankment which they'll have to scale under the watchful eye of the Germans. So, with the tide rising uncomfortably high, the company separates itself into several assault sections and begins vaulting the embankment. Working with Bangalore torpedoes to blow lanes in the wire, they move up the slopes despite heavy casualties. Salvos from the destroyer USS Doyle's 5-inch guns come to their aid, suppressing the defenders around the casemate to make such a move forward even possible. Up the shrubbery of the bluffs, Company L finally gets into close combat with the Germans. In a wild fight of small arms and grenades, the Americans neutralize the strong point in close combat. This is more important than any of the men realized at the time, but they have just eliminated a key position at the Cabourg draw, which basically neutralizes the fire against the 1st Division from Omaha's eastern extremity. So by 9 a.m., at least the far eastern flank is secure. Rudder manages communications with the Armada shortly after 8 a.m. from his crater command post, which is behind the aircraft defense bunker to the east of the battery. "This is Rudder. The Hawk is under control. I need reinforcements and ammunition. Heavy losses." In several hours he will be told, "Good job. Sorry for the reinforcements. All the Rangers have already landed in Omaha." He does not now, nor will he even then, have contact with Gorenson's or Schneider's forces. At 8:05 comes a report from the 916th Panzer Grenadier Regiment to the staff of the 352nd German Infantry Division. Weak enemy assaulted the Pointe du Hoc battery. The 1st platoon of the 726th Infantry Regiment is engaged in counterattacking 50 men in front of the WN-68 strongpoint in Virville. Others in smaller numbers in front of the WN-62 strongpoint. But that's what you might think if you were there too. See, because of the shelling and the piles of earth and rocks, the fields of fire are very short, and there are Germans atop the Pointe who will report not seeing a single American the whole morning, even though there are a whole bunch of them passing through. The Ranger advance on the German gun pits provides a textbook example of why the Rangers were chosen for this assignment and not ordinary infantry. The Rangers swarmed over Pointe du Hoc in 9 separate little groups, all with a central purpose in mind, to locate and destroy the guns. The gun pits were not far from the eastern cliff edge, so the ranger teams quickly reached their objectives. Yep, while the observation post is kept busy, Company D reaches the gun pits on the western side to find the guns removed. Company F reaches the pits on the eastern side to find the same. Our orders were to get the guns as quickly as possible. Our secondary mission was to establish a roadblock on the coastal highway to prevent German troops from going east to Omaha Beach to help out there. The movement inland now begins to develop along two axes, with Dog and Easy Company elements moving from the Pointe to the coastal road, and men of Fox Company moving parallel to Dog and Easy. D and E reach the road around 8:15. They then come under fire from all sides. A group of farmhouses to the front, small arms from the left, machine guns from the right, and even artillery. At the same time, F, which has headed through the anti-glider barriers and the minefield, reaches the Grand Camp Road. They begin advancing along the road to the west, but they too come under enemy fire. But the Rangers have soon established that roadblock along the coastal highway, and Sergeants Bud Lomel and Jack Kuhn from D Company also soon find the 5 big guns in the orchard. Lomel puts thermite grenades in the movable gears of 2 of them. These grenades don't loudly explode, but flare up with intense heat, and they fuse all the moving parts, rendering the guns useless. Lomel also smashes the sights on a 3rd. They go back to get more charges, but then an E Company patrol also comes on the scene and spikes all the gun tubes with thermite and blows up the propellant charges. Rudder's men had achieved their mission and now awaited the friendly faces of their fellow Rangers, the 116th Infantry and other 5th Corps units, in complete ignorance of what was unfolding on Omaha. Well, the plan calls for 2 more companies of the 2nd Ranger Battalion and the entire 5th Ranger Battalion to be coming up the cliffs behind them. When that happens, they will be in position to attack the flanks and the rear of the German defenders at either Omaha or Utah Beach. It will be hours, though, before they even learn the rest of the Rangers were sent to Omaha, though they might guess that from recent events. But mission accomplished or no, they still have their hands full here. Elements of Fox Company fight off a German machine gun squad advancing on Rudder's command post, and the Germans are well aware that they are on the Pointe, and they will send men for counterattacks. By 8:30, an assault platoon of about 35 men in Saint-Pierre-du-Mont as a reserve has been given the task of retaking Pointe du Hoc, and they're moving down the Grand Camp Vierville Road, though both sides avoid contact for the moment. Among the scattered paratroopers are several small groups that keep themselves busy working on special assignments. One of these groups is led by Sergeant Jake McNeese of the 506 PIR. McNeese is a sapper, a demolitions expert, tasked with blowing up bridges between Saint-Côme-du-Mont and Carentan. He lost contact with the other sappers after the drop, and is now accompanied by those men he found along the way. Staying close together is the key to surviving the hostile countryside, as is a healthy dose of ruthless aggressiveness. Moving through the bocage, north of Saint-Mère-Église towards the Carentan bridges, his group comes across a German headquarters. It was possibly a regiment, or might even have been a division. We knew that because a lot of big brass were there. It had never been mentioned as a target in our training. We did not even know where we were. We were just as surprised as the Germans were. All we did was blast them from every side, then scattered. This was a beautiful part about paratrooping. It was a commando-type operation. If we bumped into a company of Krauts marching along through there, 2 of us would just lay in and kill 15 to 30 of them, and then we were gone. They could not interrupt an operation just to hunt down 2 paratroopers. That is what we did to this headquarters. We just went right on through them, just like a bunch of bobcats. McNeese continues on. Bypassing Saint-Côme-du-Mont to the east, they eventually reach the Douve Canal across from Brévannes. Now, they usually place demolition charges underneath the girders of a bridge, then wait and see if they can hold the bridge, and if it is impossible, they blow it. Ideally, when German armor is in the process of crossing. That is the general process, and it's a bit easier at night. The Brevand Bridge now in full daylight is a totally different story. Just as McNeice starts wiring explosives under the steel girders of the bridge, he and his crew are spotted by the German guards. Under heavy fire, the sappers withdraw to the other side of the bridge. Here, they successfully hold off German attempts to get them. This is the nature of fighting over narrow bridges and causeways. This is a theme for the airborne operations of D-Day. Remember back a while ago, Dick Winters and a little group of men entered the bocage to take out the battery at Bricourt Manor, as we saw? Working their way stealthily through the thick undergrowth, the men of Company E jump into the makeshift enemy trenches. With grenades and covering fire from their machine gun, the paratroopers fight their way in rapid succession from gun position to gun position, quickly disposing of the surprised German defenders in close combat before blowing up the guns with explosives. This is 4 105mm howitzers that have been busy firing down Causeway 2 at Utah Beach, and Winter's crew has disabled and captured the battery by 8:30. But they don't just capture the battery. They also capture a map which has every German artillery position on the Cotentin Peninsula pinpointed. This is going to be of immense value to 7th Corps intelligence. With 2 out of the 3 heavy howitzer batteries destroyed, the situation at Saint-Marie-du-Mont has clearly swung to the Allies' favor. Despite being outnumbered and under-equipped, the American airborne has taken most of the German positions in and around the town, and at the same time, taken pressure off of Utah Beach. This is how the airborne and amphibious landings are supposed to work together. Sink's 506 PIR has kicked the doors into the interior of the Cotentin Peninsula wide open, and just in time, as it turns out, as the first units of the 8th Infantry are moving off Utah Beach. What could have been a complete disaster has been prevented. Realizing that the trappers are about to become the trapped, the Germans are packing up everywhere, and the once coordinated defense around Saint-Marie-du-Mont shuts down. In clear view of the first elements of the 8th Infantry, the Germans retreat from their positions on the high ground west of Causeway 2. Meanwhile, inside the Marais, Howard Johnson's decimated 501st has finally found a way to escape both the mire and the watchful eyes of the German artillery observers. They are now marching along the road that runs from Carentan through Saint-Côme-du-Mort and towards Saint-Mère-Église. Securing this road was one of the major objectives of the 501st, as it would sever the main artery by which the Germans would have to send in any reinforcements and supplies. For now, Johnson decides that just blocking the road is the best they can do under the circumstances. But the 501st has done something else. The La Barquette Dam, which spans the Douve River about 3 kilometers north of Carentan, and which has locks that control the flooding of the countryside, is under control of the 501st, as are 2 other bridges further downstream. Speaking of bridges, at La Fière, the mixed group of paratroopers from mostly the 505th PIR is still watching for signs of enemy movement. Ever since the Germans flooded that area, there are only a couple of possible places to move heavy armor over the Merderet River. John Dolan's men took Manoir de la Fière in the pre-dawn darkness. From its windows, only a grenade throw from the bridge itself, Dolan can observe the vast swamp on the eastern side of the river. He sent out a dozen of his men to cross the narrow strip of land on the other side and investigate the hamlet of Cauquigny, as you may remember. It turns out to be abandoned, but the large church in the hedgerows now serves as a natural sentry post to warn them if the Germans should finally decide to move against La Fière. Well, throughout the morning, several paratroopers have wandered into his perimeter, which is now held by a mix of elements from the 505th, 507th, and 508th. But still so far, no one has brought a working radio. Nonetheless, Dolan is determined to keep hold of his strong position and keep the road open for the 4th Division's armor. When the assault teams of Companies B and C from Conrad Simmons' 1st Battalion of the 8th dash forward with automatic fire and explosives, the enemy's resistance melts. Along the road leading off the beach, Company B takes out a place called Fort Madeleine, and Company C, Fort 5, at La Grande Dune. Except for some small arms fire, there's little to no resistance, and casualties are minimal. The road itself runs mostly parallel to the beach before turning sharply to the right. Here, the Americans clear a couple houses with grenades, effectively ending the last German resistance at the dunes behind Utah Beach. So, though Utah Beach had been considered perhaps the riskiest beach of them all, the 8th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Division has achieved its first major objective in breaking through the defenses in under an hour. But controlling the beach is only the first step. If they cannot get off the beach in force in time, then the Germans might still have a chance of pinning this vulnerable invasion force down in place. This means taking the causeways that lead into the interior of the Cotentin Peninsula. Everything now depends on the paratroopers, whose job it has been to keep these narrow roads open from the other side. If they have failed, then this could become a very difficult day after all. Well, at 8 o'clock, the third wave arrives at Utah Beach. This is mostly made up of the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Infantry Regiment and the 3rd Battalion of the 22nd, which is altogether more than 1,500 fresh troops. And everything now focuses on bringing more men and more supplies in, even as the assault teams push towards the causeways. Experts from the U.S. Army's 237th and 299th Engineer Battalions and the Navy's combat demolition units have systematically blown mines and obstacles with blocks of plastic explosives and TNT satchel charges before their remnants are pushed away by bulldozer tanks. One of the outfits that landed with the first wave was the 1st Engineer Special Brigade under Colonel Eugene Caffey. It was their task to ensure that the subsequent waves would find room to maneuver and land their equipment, right? Because even out of position, 7th Corps has to quickly sort things out. I undertook to get word to the Navy that we were completely out of position and induced them to continue the landing at the place where we were instead of trying to conform to the original plan. This, as events proved, was a good decision, because we were in the weakest part of the German lines and astraddle of the only road that led inland across the inundated areas just back of the dune lines. I think it was greatly to the credit of the 4th Division and the 1st Engineer Special Brigade that the officers and men immediately affected were not perturbed by this abrupt rearrangement of the planned battle, but went right ahead with the war as if this was the way they had always intended to do it. The main call for the 4th Division, that they have achieved the intent of a successful landing, even if not actually following the plan, and that they will continue to develop the landing from where they are, rather than go to the original landing site, and then do so, is made by Assistant Divisional Commander Theodore Roosevelt Jr. And he sends the word to all following waves to ignore the actual divisional plan and land where the men before have landed. So far, everything is still on schedule. Meanwhile, the 1st Battalion moves north towards Causeway 3, the 2nd Battalion south towards Causeway 1. It is not so much a question of if, but one of when and one of where the Germans will ultimately stage a counterattack. And for that, it is obviously important to bring as much firepower towards an advantageous position as possible. Contrary to all initial expectations, the landings at Utah Beach have achieved total victory with minimal casualties. Now the American commanders can shift from executing an amphibious invasion to fighting a conventional land war. So from mortars to jeeps to armor, Van Fleet pushes everything he has up to the lead elements of the 8th Infantry. This has the side effect of beginning what might become a serious traffic jam. Moving inland, the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Infantry Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Erasmus Strickland, marches past the burning houses at La Grande Dune and straight towards the inundated pasture lands by Causeway 2. In the distance, the men can see the domed church steeple of Saint-Marie-du-Mont, their objective. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion of the 22nd Infantry, led by Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Teague, turns sharply to the north, moving straight up the coastline. Their task is to stay close to the coast and engage the remaining German resistance nests from the flank. But this is far from being the easier task. The positions were all mutually supported along narrow strips of land between the high water mark and the inundation. At intervals, there were minefields. It was necessary to approach within 75 to 100 yards with tanks and, combined with flamethrowers, assault the positions, using demolitions and pole charges. We had naval fire and 4.2-inch mortars to replace our artillery, and the successive enemy positions were shelled by the Navy before being assaulted. The tanks would be brought up for point-blank fire, while the infantry maneuvered inland around the rear of the pillbox. As the battalion progressed up the coast, the maneuver of the infantry became more difficult, since the neck of land between the beach and the inundation narrowed until the men had to wade waist deep in order to get behind the fortifications. The enemy would let men wade up without firing a shot until they were right up to the pillbox, and then open up point blank with machine gun fire and cut them down. Pillbox after pillbox, the men of the 3rd Battalion engaged German resistance points with little more than handheld explosives. Standard American military doctrine focuses on having strong artillery backup, but it will be another couple hours until the first heavy howitzers are brought ashore. The only support now are 5 Shermans from 746 Tank Battalion who are landing from 845. But these 33-ton tanks have a very awkward time moving over the sandy slopes, which also happen to still be littered with mines. And the Germans have effective anti-tank weapons. At the strongpoint Les Dunes de Varville, the Americans have several tanks hit and disabled by mines or Panzerschreck hits. Okay, they do have other support from the Navy or some unconventional outfits like the 87th Chemical Mortar Battalion. The 87th landed a while ago with their 4.2-inch mortars in tow, but they have to be assembled before use. From their landing craft, the men managed to drag several wheeled carts onto the beach, carrying many different containers from which they painstakingly assembled their mortars. But the effort is very well received, as the 87th now provides valuable support. A little more detail on the 6th Battalion, the Green Howards, who came ashore last hour. These men, under Robin Hastings, landed a bit west of La Riviere, coming under fire. The Montfleury battery over there has those big 122mm guns, and D Company Commander Ronnie Lofthouse, together with Company Sergeant Major Stan Hollis, make for that. When they spot their forward units about to come under enemy machine gun fire from German units they had not seen and had bypassed, who were about to hit them from behind, Hollis charges the position with his Sten gun, and firing that and sending grenades through the pillbox firing slit causes the Germans inside to surrender. He does basically the same to the next one over, taking over 25 prisoners by himself and saving his company from being decimated by flanking fire, peering slightly into the future. By 9:45, the whole position is in battalion hands. 8:15 a.m., 86 Hertfordshire Yeomanry Field Regiment Artillery A, C, and E troops land on the beach just below the Vers-sur-Mer lighthouse and in front of the Montfleury Artillery Battery in support of 69th Brigade. This is with the 7th Green Howards, who land a few minutes later and will bypass La Riviere and push inland. This completes the landing of 69th Brigade. 8:25, LCTs containing some of regimental headquarters hit the beaches. Difficulties experienced, underwater obstacles, mainly mines and devices on stakes, heavy swells, congestion on narrow beach, some vehicles drowned, particularly M14s and Jeeps. 8:30, a CO's party lands. This is Brigadier Alexander Stanier, commanding 231st Brigade, and he lands on King Red Beach. He checks out the unit assembly area, which has previously been earmarked on the map as the site for the beach field dressing station. The site is considered unsuitable, so it will be established in the school at Vers-sur-Mer. Casualties so far have been treated on the beaches. That changes with the arrival of 200th Field Ambulance RMC under Peter Johnson. He has this to say: "Nowhere to set up my show. Dotted everywhere were sodden bundles of Hampshires, Devons, and Dorsets that had led the infantry spearhead. Tanks still burning, LCTs blown up by mines, houses afire, craters, smells, Achtung Minen signs with skulls and crossbones, and so many, many wounded, and nowhere to put them." He sets up by the side of the road in a space basically a meter wide, with the road and traffic on one side and the minefield on the other. 9 a.m., 4 Jeep ambulance cars and 4 motorcycles land. These are used for evacuation of casualties, at first to beach dressing station and later to Beach FDS. B&D companies of the Winnipeg Rifles take the big concrete emplacements guarding the harbor after tough fighting. When I say tough fighting, I am not kidding. One source reports B down to 26 out of the 119 men they'd begun with. Once they've captured the enemy beach positions, they climb over the dunes and head inland. What faces B Company is where the river curves in a sort of semicircle and makes kind of an island. B gets to clearing this area of the enemy. D Company crosses the minefield in front of La Valette and makes for the village of Grès-sur-Mer. The 7th Brigade reserves land 20 minutes or so after the assault teams, so within the first quarter of this hour, and while sure there is still some mortar and machine gun fire hitting the beach, it has been locally cleared of the enemy, so they head right over the dunes and make for Saint-Croix-de-Mer. All the specialized armor arrives late on the beaches here, and it arrives as the incoming tide does, which causes a fair amount of chaos. See, the infantry has gone over the dunes, but neither of the two planned exits from Mike Beach are open. So at 8:30, the flails from 2nd Dragoons and the AVREs from the Royal Engineers, both from the British 79th Armored Division, land on a beach that's just 100 meters wide. The two gaps they're to now try to make are number 1 at the west of the beach, which goes to a lane that leads to Vaux, and number 2 to the east, which goes to a lane that leads toward La Valette. The other assault battalion from Canadian 7th Brigade to land is the Regina Rifle Regiment. They land at Nan Green, just east of the mouth of the river, which is right at the Courseulles town beach. This is right in front of Widerstands Nest 29 with its mighty firepower. So the landing craft are hit hard all the way into the shoreline. The supporting armor from British 79th Armored Division, just like at Mike Beach, is late arriving. But here, B Squadron of the Canadian 6th Armored Regiment, the 1st Hussars, does manage to land just before the first wave of infantry does. 19 DDs are launched from 2 kilometers out, 14 of them reach the beaches, and they are firing away for all they're worth when the Regina Rifles come in weaving among them. The advanced troops, A and B companies, begin coming in at 8:10, A right in front of the nasty German defenses and B to the east. Ahead of them was 200 yards of exposed beach, swept by German fire. Each man leaving the craft had to wade through tumbling surf and then make a mad dash for cover at the top of the sandy shoreline. But the only cover to be had on that exposed seafront was under the guns of the strongpoint. For the infantry on the beach, it was like running into the mouth of the dragon. Help was on hand from the supporting armor, and one by one, the DD tanks closed in on the concrete emplacements and machine gun nests, sweeping the area with their own machine guns and firing armor-piercing rounds at close range. They managed to knock out one of the 75s by a direct hit, which kills the whole crew. In fact, they managed to knock out all the guns by direct fire from close range. See, this is how it's been planned to happen between the armor and the infantry on these beaches. The Reginas arrived to discover 14 out of 19 B Squadron DD tanks of the 1st Hussars had managed to swim ashore and were setting about the gun emplacements. Both found that they were overwhelmed quicker by tank infantry teams. The bunkers containing the 88mm, 75mm, and 50mm guns fell in succession to direct hits. This quietens the beach for a little while, but soon enough artillery and mortar fire from inland begins to shower the area. This will continue the whole morning until each battery can be identified and then eliminated by naval guns or offshore artillery. A few positions are also overtaken by Canadian troops. Other than those DDs though, their specialized armor lands 40 minutes behind schedule. Since it's quiet, they get right to opening exits off the beach. Crabs flail over the dunes and up to the anti-tank ditch. AVREs bring fascines for that, and they cross that no problem. And they even have an armored bulldozer carving lanes. By 9 a.m., they have 2 exit lanes open. The tanks head through the streets of Courseulles and will try to help the Regina Rifles clear the town. The 2 reserve companies, C and D, come in 15 minutes after the assault wave lands at 8:25 to 8:30. C gets right off the beach and to its sector of the town to start clearing that. See, they've divided the town into 12 numbered sections or blocks, and each company has been assigned certain ones. They have even been training street fighting techniques for the past few months because, unlike all the rest of the landing infantry today, Only the Regina Rifles are tasked with making an assault landing and then clearing the streets of a town held by the enemy. That's not an easy job, though. First off, the landing craft of D Company managed to hit a bunch of mines, hedgehogs, and other underwater obstacles, which rip apart or blow apart a whole bunch of them. So only 49 men of the company reach the rendezvous point and are ready to hit the town. The rest of the Canadian Scottish Rifles, minus C Company that landed with the assault wave, come in on Mike Beach around 8:30. They take a bunch of mortar fire when they land and get delayed by a minefield, but by the end of the hour, they are making ready to break out over the fields. When the hour begins further east on Nan, Queen's Own Rifles have finished their dash from the beach and then get to the destruction of the enemy strongpoint. Company A taking those huge casualties in just minutes, I mentioned last hour. However, once B Company starts entering Bernier, a lot of the pressure is taken off of A, and they work around the open ground to the western side of the town. The follow-up companies, C and D, make their landings. Both of these have an easier time of things, though mines take out a few of D's landing craft, so more and more Canadians are pushing into the village, and they soon clear the southern edge. By 8:45, A has cleared and secured the road through the village, and by 9 a.m., Bernier is in Canadian hands. The specialist armor is late, as per norm, and it arrives on the beaches to find them clear of small arms and local fire. This is the B and C squadrons of the Fort Garry Horse. DD tanks spend the rest of the hour blasting away at the bunkers while the engineers try to make a beach exit for vehicles. The first crab flails a path up to the seawall, and the AVRE lays a bridge across it. Another AVRE starts to cross this, but hits a mine and gets stuck. An armored bulldozer comes to push it out of the way, which it does, but just after that, it too hits a mine, killing its driver. They manage to build a second exit, and crabs flail a pathway between the two of them. This actually takes until 9:30 to accomplish. They then get busy clearing the mines in the fields behind the beach so the vehicles can get going. The brigade's reserve battalion, Le Régiment de la Chaudière, starts landing about 8:30. It comes ashore right in front of Bernier and is also held up at the seawall while the assault units still work on taking out the strongpoint. The other assault battalion from 8th Brigade to land is the men of the North Shore New Brunswick Regiment, who hit Nan Red a few minutes past the hour. They attack with A Company on their right and B on their left, just to the west of Saint-Aubin. The Germans at WN-27 in the village, though, have that 50mm gun in a casemate on top of the seawall, and machine guns and mortars at the edge of the beach, and they can and do sweep the attackers with deadly fire. They have also fortified several local villas into strongpoints here. A word about that, quoted in Sand and Steel from another source. Several houses had all windows and openings to seaward bricked up. Some had sandbags beneath first-floor windows to provide cover for snipers. Elaborate and very strong reinforced concrete portions housing the main weapons and command posts were constructed, with walls and roofs estimated to be 3 to 5 foot thick. Shelters with 8-inch concrete slabs covered with masonry and earth were provided, with exceptional command of the beach. In general, the defenses consisted of a series of earthen strongpoints from which machine guns could be sighted, linked by an intricate and extensive system of communications trenches. Numerous mortar positions existed, consisting of concrete chambers with magazines attached built flush with the land. B Company's first job is to deal with this Widerstands nest, and they hit the beach, make a mad dash of 100 meters to reach the seawall, and swing eastward to hopefully do so. Their first DD tanks ashore are knocked out, as are the first two AVREs behind them. And the AVREs are quite late again, so making an exit to get the armor off the beach is going to take some time. A Company lands against much lighter enemy fire. The men break for the seawall and they cross it and clear the way to the east-west road running behind the beach. C and D companies come ashore and have it even easier in general. D clears out the southern part of Saint-Aubin and C just heads for Tailleville a few kilometers away. They won't meet much of the enemy until they get close to it, but when they do, he is well dug in and fights tenaciously. Behind the North Shores are 6 LCIs that have come all the way across the channel from the Hamble River near Southampton. This is 48 Royal Marine Commando under Lieutenant Colonel James Moulton. Their landing is anything but smooth. 2 of the 6 hit mines and are destroyed with a lot of men dying. And when they land, Nan Red still hasn't been cleared of the enemy, so they too have to run for it across the beach and hide under the seawall, taking further casualties. They are quite unfortunate, actually. North Shore and Fort Garry Horse are supposed to have secured the beach before they land. But not only that, 48 Commando lands right in front of strong, unsubdued positions. Moulton has had the clever foresight, at least, to have his men fire mortar smoke from the bows of the craft when they approach the beach, which helps hide the men slowly exiting the damaged craft. They do eventually manage to get out of there and head east for their double mission. They are first to take WN-26 at Langrune, and then meet up with 41 Royal Marine Commando coming from Sword Beach, thus linking up the landings made by British 1st Corps. Before that, however, they will have to clear Saint-Auban, and that will take some time. 8 a.m. 24 landing craft carrying the 1st Commandos from Lord Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade and 41 Royal Marine Commando from Brigadier Jumbo Lester's 4th Special Service Brigade begin their landings. 48 and 46 Commando at Juno and 47 at Gold are also part of the latter. 4 Commando lands at the very left of Queen Red, ready to move on the casino at Riva Bella and the Ouistreham gun battery. The East Yorks, though, are supposed to have cleared the beach for them to pass through, and this has not yet been accomplished. So they take a lot of small arms fire and must fight their way off the beach and onto the lateral road behind it, which leads to Ouistreham. They do not get drawn into the fighting for cod, but blow the barbed wire surrounding the beach with Bangalore torpedoes and race through the gaps. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dawson, has decided that the French Commando attached to 4 Commando, French Commando 10 made up of French troops 1 and 8, will take the lead into Ouistreham, and the 5 British troops will follow. The French have taken the casino as an independent objective. These are also the only French ground troops to land this day. They do not meet very much opposition en route, and number 1 French troop manages to occupy houses to the front and sides of the casino, though an attack on it is beaten back. Number 8 comes at the casino from the rear. Okay, the casino has actually been demolished by the Germans, and they are using the rubble as the defense position. They've got interlocking bunkers, minefields, barbed wire, machine guns, you name it, but very little of that is actually above ground and visible to the commandos, except the anti-tank wall. Philippe Kiefer commands the French commando, and a small arms battle develops, but the defenders have more than small arms. There's a big bunker with a steel cupola, a 75mm and a 50mm gun under concrete, and a water tower high above. After half an hour of fighting, it seems like Kiefer will lose a battle of attrition, but he gets word that some DD tanks have reached the outskirts of Ouistreham. He runs off to bring one in and comes back riding on a Sherman. That tank knocks out the tower and the concrete and pretty much just silences the bunker. The French then clear the casino. Okay, I am both jumping the gun here and leaving out color. The casino is not silenced and secured until about 9:30. But this hour, Kiefer actually runs into an old friend of his, a local civilian, who gives him the layout of the defenses and even shows where the Germans have buried the telephone lines. The rest of 4 Commando comes at the gun battery at the mouth of the Orne from behind. The guns themselves are in open emplacements, but the whole zone is fortified like the casino, with machine guns at every approach, an anti-tank ditch, and anti-tank guns, and over the whole thing, a concrete tower 17 meters high. Now, this is used for control and ranging, but even though it's not for offense, it is built to last, and its parapets are perfect for dropping grenades over onto Marines. The men of 4 Commando attack the gun emplacements in a series of short firefights linked by bouts of rapid movement, never allowing the momentum to slacken. They came at the enemy from all angles, passing from cover to cover through the bomb craters. Firing as they ran, they were soon among the trenches, sweeping along them with light machine gun fire and grenades. Enemy return fire came at the commandos from all directions, from machine gun posts dotted around the edge of the fortified area and from the observation slit at the top of the tower. But guess what? When they get close, they find that the big guns are not there. They have actually been moved inland by the Germans, so continuing this attack is pointless for the commandos, and they head back to Ouistreham to regroup. 41 Royal Marine Commando lands like 300 meters to the west of where they plan, at the very western end of Queen White. They want to take out Strongpoint Trout at Lyon-sur-Mer and also hit the chateau west of town. They are also to link up with the commando coming east from Juno Beach, linking the beaches, and have as a secondary objective knocking out the radar station at Douvres. The first Suffolks arrive, the reserve regiment of 8th Brigade, and move through the carnage that is the fighting for Strongpoint Cod. They get the radio message around 8:30 that the bridges over the Orne and the canal have been taken intact, which means that at least for now their left flank is secure, and they head off for their assignment, Colleville. The specialty armor is still working on getting exits cleared so the vehicles can get off the beaches. As I said, it takes an hour for the first of the 6 exits to be even cleared, and the first tracked vehicles can finally leave the beach at 8:40. It looks like it will be another couple hours, though, before wheeled vehicles will be able to use the exits. The self-propelled artillery comes in on the beaches. Behind them, the incoming tide means the water has now almost reached the dunes. So the beach is just like 30 meters wide at points. This is a big problem. With the imminent arrival of more landing craft, bringing increasing numbers of troops, tanks, guns, and transport, the water's edge became a scene of chaos and disorder. Traffic jams began to grow at the exits, and it took all the skill of the beachmasters to extricate each new unit from the melee. At about 8 a.m., some Spitfires fly over the bridges. Howard uses scarves and parachutes to set up ground-to-air signals that say they're in charge. Things are all right. 3 Spitfires bearing, like all the other Allied aircraft in the invasion, 3 white bars on each wing, peel off, dive to 300 meters, and then circle the bridges doing a bunch of victory rolls. As they pulled away, one of them dropped an object. Howard thought the pilot had jettisoned his reserve petrol tank, but he sent a reconnaissance patrol to find out what it was. The patrol came back, and to our great surprise and amusement, it was the early editions from Fleet Street. There was a scramble for them amongst all the troops, especially for the Daily Mirror, which had a cartoon strip called Jane, and they were all scuffling for Jane. There were 1 or 2 moans about there being no mention of the invasion or D Company at all. And at other bridges, at 8:30 a.m., men of C Company of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion and sappers of the 3rd Parachute Squadron of Royal Engineers blow the bridge at Varville. These sappers are under Lieutenant Ted Bailey.
Okay, obviously the boys at Benneville don't know this, but as we saw at the top of the hour, the absence of news about the invasion in the English papers is not so remarkable. But there's another absence in this hour that is the complete lack of reports to or from German command about the situation on the coast.
Well, like we've repeatedly pointed out, communications are interrupted, and the confusion in the German ranks is at this point more or less total.
Yes, the communication reports between the German higher-ups this hour focus on speculations about a possible uprising by the French resistance if the warning to the French population indicates that the Allies are about to deploy gas, and where the hell the release by the OKW to deploy 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend is.
At least they are now finishing up preparations to go out and see what is going on and fight back.
But since no one in command really knows where what is happening, one cannot help wonder if they know where to go.
We may well find that out as we return for the 10th hour of D-Day.